Hey everybody, it's Safi and Marco Dish Out on Movies, the only movie review show on YouTube to review movies in terms of food. It's just Marco here once again, and I am here today to review another Goosebumps book. Because basically what I'm going to be starting to do with these books is I'm going to just read them the same day that I review them. And it's helpful just in terms of details because I don't want to risk waiting for a month and then being like, oh wow, look, Goosebumps. And then not remembering something that, would have been great to talk about. There's a lot of little details in these books, even though they're these little kids' books that, for some reason, a lot of adults, love Goosebumps, even more than kids nowadays. I mean, it's gotten to that point. And that's why I've always stuck with they need to evolve the series into just making it for adults. And then you can still have kids Goosebumps stuff, but it would mainly be for adults. That's really what they need to do instead of just doing this pretend thing where, oh look, kids are now going to be into Goosebumps, and it's like, no, kids don't even care about Goosebumps very much unless their parent gets them into it. Kids care about is stupid superheroes and crap. Well, they don't care about the comics, they just care about the terrible Disney movies. So I am here to review Night in Terror Tower. This is a very popular book. I love the episode. The episode was one of my first ones that I ever saw because as a kid, we only had these certain VHS because they never released all the episodes on VHS. And I still have that same copy in one of these boxes in my room. So I still have the same version of that I watched when I first saw it. And it was a really good episode. I mean, it's a very simple but good story. It's got time travel. It's about these two kids. They go on a tour of Terror Tower, which is basically like the Tower of London. And one of the things that's really good about the book is the fact that it seems like that he's stretching the rules because it has to do with history. And it feels like a lot of the stuff that he does in the book, he couldn't have done with another book, like Monster Blood 2, for example, a book where I've notoriously said that should have been an R-rated slasher, because the whole first half, you have all these piece of shit characters, and the only thing you want to see happen is that in the second half, they get killed. Like I don't care about if it's kids or not. It was perfectly set up as a slasher story, and then they just still went with the kiddie version. Well, with this, it felt a lot more like he could push the boundaries because it's historical fact. You're talking about torture, in-depth description. Oh, look, here's the rack. Here's the thumb screws. Here's the prison room where they kept people all day and night and they never got any food and they would get tortured and shit. And it's so opposite to what the other stories are in the series, where you have these goofy little monsters or these creatures and things and just nothing really dangerous is going to happen, at least on the page. But in this story, it feels like there's a lot more danger, there's a lot more stakes. The stakes are higher, and I really like that a lot about this story. So these kids are in this museum, and they get trapped there. They get lost from the group, and they get trapped in this museum overnight, and they have to escape. And in the way to escaping, they run into a Man in Black character, and he is the Lord High Executioner from the medieval times, and he wants to chase them and take them back in time because, oh wow, they were never Eddie and Sue. They were Edward and Susanna, which were this prince and princess who got executed in medieval times. So he wants to take them back there to fulfill that, because there's also the sorcerer for the king. He helped them escape and go travel in time to the future and get out of it and become new people. And it's a really interesting and good story. Like, I really love the basic idea of everything, and I really liked how they go to so many places. I mean, it's not just the museum, and that's another thing with a lot of his books. Just stay in a couple of places, as if it's like a movie and they can't afford any other places, but they can. It's a book. He can have them go anywhere he wants. And so they go to a lot of different interesting locations. And I will say, though, the book, it is very average and dull for the first half. It's very lukewarm. Another lukewarm tale. I really didn't feel like there was much of note that happened in the first half. It was basically the episode, but without the great music and the great imagery that the episode had. Another thing was the fact that in the book, they're already inside the tower. And I loved how in the episode, they started off on the outside, and already they look up at the tower and they see a really creepy image of a guy in the tower window, and he's screaming for their help. And there's so many like creepy, scary things that happen in the episode in comparison to the book. And I'll say too that like the episode was actually one of the scarier ones as a kid. Like, it was one where I was like, okay, I'm going to have to prepare to watch this. It wasn't just a nice episode like what would be a nice Goosebumps episode? Well, like Attack of the Jack-o'-lanterns, that one wasn't very scary. No, Terror Tower had some scary shit in the episode. In the book, however, it's just kind of like, okay, so you got these kids, they're getting chased around by this man in black. It's really not as scary as the episode. And a lot of the stuff that happens in the episode, the way that it's spaced out through these pages and pages, the pacing of it really isn't as good as in the episode where, it's only a 40-minute story. And so, you just have 1, 2, 3, the things happen. So the book feels slower. Not that slow, though. I've complained in a lot of the other books about them being slow. I don't think it's that slow. The characters, too, are pretty dull, just like in the other books. But I do like how Eddie is a pickpocket. That is a little bit of a character trait. And I really like that aspect of the story. In fact, I think that that's one of the things that sets this character apart from other Goosebumps characters, is just the simple fact that, oh, fuck, he can pick pockets and shit. He can just... I mean, keep in mind, guys, the Lord High Executioner is a powerful, evil piece of shit villain. He is really evil. He will kill kids. He will probably do other things to them too. I mean, he is a very evil villain, and you do not want to mess with him. He likes to torture people. I don't think that... well, that's another question, though, and we'll talk about that. But Eddie is able to pickpocket this massive villain, this ultra villainous presence, this fucking huge 300-pound gorilla of a person, this guy with like these bulging superhero muscles, and this just a complete sociopathic cold persona. And Eddie, this 12-year-old kid, is so cool that he's able to pickpocket the magic stones from him. That's one of my favorite parts of this book, is just the fact that Eddie can pickpocket. I really like that a lot. So they run. They escape the museum, and they go into the sewer. And this is another different thing that happens from the episode, where in the episode there's bats that scare away the Lord High Executioner. Well, in the book, it's rats. And I think that rats are actually a better choice, because if you're in the medieval times, you're not thinking about bats. You're thinking about the plague, and you're thinking about rats. And so I thought that that was a much smarter choice. And then they get away. They have the whole thing that's pretty much similar to the episode with the cab driver, and they can't pay him. The difference, though, is that he chases these kids into the hotel. He follows them through the restaurant. Like, he is really a creep. He is a really looking guy. He very creepy, very evil. And in the book, he just lets them walk right into the hotel, and I guess they're gonna go back and pay him later. And then they get away with a lot more in the book than they do in the episode, and I really don't like that, because the episode, and I feel bad too, because I'm supposed to just be reviewing the book, but I can't help it. I saw the episode a million times, and I've only read this book once. So, yeah, I just can't help but make a comparison. But what was I saying? In the episode, though, it's a lot scarier. It's a lot more intense, because they do not get away with all this stuff. Like, they go into the hotel, and they're like, hey, well, our room is this room. Well, in the episode, they say, no, it's not. That you don't have any room registered here at all. And they have to move on. Well, in the book, they manage to get someone to take them up to a room, open up the door, and let them walk around the room and look around for a note that their invisible parents left. So, just so many things in the book that are not done effectively compared to the episode. Like, it was really uncomfortable, an uncomfortable feeling when you realized, like, wait a second, who are these kids' parents? Who are these kids? Like, it was a really tense feeling that you had every time you learned that, like, oh, all the stuff they thought was true was not true. Like, it was really good. In the book, it's like, it's just so much, way less. Just so, where was I going with that? I don't know what I was gonna say after that. Then they go into the restaurant. In the episode, they're running away from the cab driver, and they're getting in trouble because they don't have suits. They don't have suits on like these proper English people. And so the guy has to come over and give them like a suit jacket, and the girl a coat or something. And that's an extra element that they added to the episode. And you're not going to believe this. And I did like the fact that the book explained what was going on, because I had always wondered in the episode, like, why are these people just eating all these sweets when they're, it doesn't look like it's like dessert time. It looks more like the time you'd have lunch or something, or maybe breakfast, I don't know. But apparently it was tea time, and so all that they were serving was tea and pastries and scones and stuff. Well, in the episode, they don't get any food at all. And then the cab driver points them out and shouts at them to get caught, and they have to get out of there as fast as possible. It's not like in the book where they're like, oh wow, look, there's our food, and then they have like a whole tea time session. I mean, sorry, but you just can't make something scary. You can't make a chase sequence scary if they're able to stop the chase and have tea time with each other, you know? Like, that's just not scary. And they finally catch up with the Lord High Executioner, and Eddie gives him the stones, not really knowing that they're going to take them back in time and try to kill them. And then they take them back in time, and the sister is the only one there. The executioner managed to get the brother and grab him, and the sister's just running around town. And the best part of the book is the second half, because the description for the medieval period, it was so much better than the description for the modern Terror Tower Museum story. Like, they have this really detailed description of the dining rooms and the people on the street, and it was a really great sequence of the book where you're just discovering what it was like back then, supposedly. And another thing that's great is that, and here's something else. I'm going to sit down now. I think I'm tiring myself out. In the episode, I never realized that the first half and the second half are reversals of each other. So everything that happens in the first half of the episode, the opposite happens in the second half. So, for instance, they take the cab driver, and the only money that they have is medieval money, and so obviously they can't pay him. Well, in the second half, she is able to pay for a carriage and then pay for a woman to hide her. So it's like all the reversals in the second half are really cool, because you're seeing everything pay off, and you're seeing all these questions get answered, and you're seeing all these things happen that wouldn't have been able to happen in the future. And it also shows, too, that the sorcerer, he really wasn't very smart, and we'll get to Mordred or Mordred, I can't remember, because I'm thinking about Dr. Mordred. Oh, I think it's Mordred. Yeah, Mordred. I think that's what his name is. So, what happens is she gets caught, the executioner takes her, locks her up with her brother inside the Terror Tower. That's something else that I loved, is that everything ends up in Terror Tower. Like, you just cannot escape Terror Tower. Like, they thought, like, oh, we're going to get away, but no, they have to eventually go back to this place. And so I like that, how they have to confront their fears, which reminded me a lot of The Girl Who Cried Monster, where she thought she was going to stay away from this library forever, but then her mother forces her to go back there and have another session with Mr. Mortman, the librarian. And having to confront your fear is a really good horror story tactic, I guess you'd say, or just thing to happen, you know, because usually in horror stories nowadays, people pretend like, oh God, our characters are so smart, they would never do anything stupid, and so the characters are a lot worse nowadays because they they're sort of like fake people, and they're really like robots and with just cliches on top of them. Really not full characters like they were back in the 90s or 80s or 70s or 60s or 50s and before then too. So this is the part where, the book, I really did like the second half a lot. The first half, I was going to almost give this book a D, but in the second half, it got so much better that I'm going to give it a C+. It's another book where I think it's pretty average. There's nothing really in the book that sticks out to me to make me want to read it again, in comparison to like Piano Lessons Can Be Murder, where it takes place in the winter, and there's so much darker stuff in that, and really good ghost story and a lot of stuff in that you don't get in this book. This book is just a very average adventure. I mean, nothing really happens in comparison to the episode. Like, in terms of the stuff that happens in the episode, they make it so much better. They make it, all the events happen in such a more satisfying way, and a scarier way. And so it's hard to really say like, oh yeah, this book is an A+, because it's Terror Tower. Like, no, I'm not going to do that. This book is a C+, especially for what happens at the end. Because in the end you find out that it's basically like The Lion King or Hamlet, where the evil uncle, he had both parents executed, and he was going to have their children executed as well, so that he could take the throne. And the sorcerer sent them to the future with new names, and they were not supposed to have any memory of the medieval time. And yeah, I mean, if that doesn't sound stupid, I don't know what does. Because there's so many problems with that. Like, number one, how are they able to adapt so well to the modern era with just time traveling there? Like, I'm sorry, but that just would not happen. They would not be able to just time travel to the 90s from the medieval time, and like, oh wow, we were from the 90s. Like, no, they would not think that at all. That they would feel strange at everything that they did. You just think about going to the bathroom. In the medieval time, they didn't have a toilet, and so these kids, like, they'd be like, wait a second, what's a bathroom? Or, there's a lot of other things too, like a taxi versus a carriage. And, you just think about the logic of that, of like, did this sorcerer really think that everything was going to stay the same in the... I mean, he's not that bright of a sorcerer. I mean, he's kind of a dipshit. And he doesn't want them to have any memory of them being in the medieval times, which is bizarre because I don't really, at the same time, like, what if any bad guy from the medieval time, since they're sorcery, what if they time travel just to kill these kids, and then they have no memory? Like, you can see it was not a good idea for them to not have a memory, right? Like, that was not a good idea. Another thing would be, what would that translate to nowadays, since they are the prince and princess? If they were really able to prove that nowadays, it would be a massive story. It would be like the Twilight Zone, and there would be like a discussion of if they deserve to have the throne now or something. Like, it would be a big thing. And so you think about all these different plot holes. Why couldn't he have just sent them to somewhere else in the world back then? And like the sorcerer, I mean the executioner guy, he could have gone to any time period, to any place that they went. So why not just send them to somewhere else in the world right then and there, so that they know how to live and survive, and they don't have to worry about, oh, well, our parents, they have a hotel room and they're in a meeting right now. And it's like, no, they're not, because they don't exist. So you just think of all these like little things that the sorcerer didn't think of. Another thing is that they kind of ignore the fact that this terror tower existed before before the uncle ever tried to seize power. I mean, the terror tower was used by Eddie and Sue's parents. Like, they probably took people to terror tower and tortured them and raped them and killed their children. Like, just because they're kids, that doesn't really make a difference in the medieval times. Like, they would have grown up to be just as evil as their parents if their parents, you just can't say, though. Like, that's the thing. That's the kind of hard thing here, is that, if these kids had grown up and became prince and princess and had power, they might have used the terror tower too. Like, just because they're kids, like, they just get these little sympathy points. It's kind of BS. It's like, no, you gotta take the extra effort to show me that these kids aren't gonna grow up to be like the characters on Game of Thrones. Which I haven't seen it, but I've heard all about the kinds of things that they did on the show. And it's like, that's what these kids would have grown up to be if they had stayed in the medieval times. I mean, just even in the episode, at the end of the episode, the way that they're talking and the way that they have these stupid outfits on that are like there's jewels all over them, and you can just sense that, like, fucking Eddie would have, I don't even want to know, like, grown up Eddie, King Eddie would have killed so many people, tortured them, raped them. He would have been a bad guy. Queen Susanna, she would have done the same thing. She would have been like the Elizabeth Bathory of Goosebumps. Just because their uncle is like slightly more evil than them doesn't really make them any less evil. Like, and I'm not saying that he was right in executing the children. But what I'm saying, though, is that as a reader, as an audience member, you're looking at these kids and you're thinking, oh, I want them to survive because they're kids. But you're not really thinking about, this is a historical story. And these kids are not just kids. They are prince and princess of people who lock people up in a terror tower and rip their arms and legs off. I mean, the uncle wasn't the one who created the rack. Like their parents were. Their parents put up the rack. Their parents paid for the rack. Their parents paid for the thumb screws. Like, it's almost surprising that the kids in the episode never have a flashback to torturing people. Because you'd think about, like, if you were a kid, and of course, what do you guys think? Do you think that like, kids of these rulers, do you think that they were sheltered and didn't have to see this stuff happen? Or do you think that they might have seen it once in a while? Because I genuinely think if you saw that stuff happen as a kid, because that stuff doesn't happen anymore, unless it's like in secret by a cult or something. It doesn't happen anymore. So you're thinking, though, like, if those kids saw these displays, these intricate displays, these fucking thumb screws, they would definitely have like fucking Vietnam flashbacks of these people getting tortured by their parents, the supposed good people in the story. You know, they would have had flashbacks to like some really bad stuff happening, like even worse than anything I could even describe on YouTube, if you know what I mean. Like, they would have seen some terrible things. They would have seen, like, babies being thrown into a pot and then made into a baby soup or something. Like, it would not have been like this romanticized Fantasyland version of the medieval times where it's like, oh, look at these rulers. They're such nice people because they're 12-year-olds. Like, that's the thing, too. Like, you think about in the episode, like, all these gross people that you see that are just common people, peasants, and you see, like, that old lady who, you know, she doesn't have any teeth, and she's probably a medieval crack whore, and you think about, like, these people are suffering, and these fucking rich douchebags, they're wearing jewels that could probably pay for all those people to have food for a whole lifetime. And you just think about, like, are these characters really people who we should root for? Like, I'm not saying, like, all these people should just be generalized. I'm just saying, if you want to create likable characters, you have to go the extra mile and give them a story where it's like, oh, these parents, they weren't like any other medieval rulers at the time. Wink, wink. And their kids, you know, they were taught to be good people and to not torture and rape and kill. And they were taught to actually help people who are peasants instead of just murdering them all. You know, like, I just didn't see any of that, though. It's just like, oh, they're kids, so that means that you have to root for them. And it's like, no, sorry, not me. So, and it ends on this really anticlimactic note where instead of the episode where they are about to be executed and Morgrid grabs the stones from the executioner and then transports himself with the kids to the future, instead, they are still in the cell, imprisoned, and they have been given the time to do a spell and a ritual. They don't even need the stones. And it's just this really terribly, like, convenient, weak ending to this story that, like, spans centuries. And it just doesn't feel like a satisfying ending. And then you have the ending of the book where they say, oh, hey guys, let's go to Burger Palace. And it's like, they said the word palace. And it's like, oh, God. R.L. Stine. You know what, though? I will say it is a better ending than these really shitty Goosebumps endings where the people turn into, like, dogs or something, and then they're like, hey, we were dogs the whole time. You know, like, it is a better little zinger of an ending. Because that's what it is. He basically ends this Goosebumps book on a dad joke zinger, where it's like, hey, we just went to Terror Tower. Let's go to Hamburger Palace. And it's like, oh, God, R.L. Stine. Oh, would you? What a cheesy '90s ending. But oh, God. So this book is a C+. It's really, I mean, the episode's ending is 1,000 times better, where these kids are about to have their heads chopped off on television. And you're thinking, I really hope it doesn't happen, but I don't know, it could happen. And then what happens is that Morgrid, he transports himself and them to the future, and he's so badass because he's gonna take care of him. And he's like, you know what? You guys couldn't do it on your own. I probably should have sent an adult with you, since you don't have any parents at all. So I'm gonna be your daddy now. You're gonna have Daddy Morgred, and you're gonna be just fine. And then in the background, you see the Lord High Executioner, and he's got the stones, and he's ready to get them again. And you're thinking, like, wow, that was a really good ending. Like, just, it's just such a better ending than this book where it's like, let's go to Hamburger Palace and get a hamburger and a cheeseburger and fries. It's like, yeah, okay. So anyways, the book is just pretty average. I mean, it's nowhere near as good as the other C pluses even. Like, it was really close to being just a C, but I did enjoy the second half for the most part until it got to the end. So anyways, please like this video, comment, tell me what you thought of the book, because I know it's a lot of people, they think this book is a classic, and that's fine, because the general story is a great idea. And then please subscribe to our channel if you'd like to see more honest Goosebumps book reviews. Goodbye everybody, see you soon.